Charles Wheelan, you are a public policy and economic professor at Dartmouth College. You are primarily known for your best-selling books, Naked Economics, Naked Statistics, and Naked Money. And today, we will be speaking about the highest point in your career, which is the publication of your latest book, We Came, We Saw, We Left, A Family Gap Year. Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
So I see from your background that you do a lot of traveling. You travel with your students, but this travel was a little bit different. You were traveling with your teenage kids and your wife, and you were facing all kind of strange circumstances. Of course, it's not the same traveling with your 13-year-old boys than traveling with college students. And we will get into that. But can we start by you telling us a little bit about your background? I see that you have written many books in economics, statistics, money, etc. Yeah, can you just let us know who are you?
I would say as long as I can remember, I've had an interest in writing, even in elementary school, but certainly by high school, I was writing a column in the high school newspaper. In college, I actually started a newspaper called Common Sense that was meant to bridge the political divide, which of course has only gotten worse since then. Along the way, I also developed an interest in what I now recognize as public policy. At the time, I'm not sure I would have known to describe it that way, but I was always curious, why are some countries rich, some countries are poor? Who thrives in this country? What are the barriers to thriving? Why is healthcare so more expensive in this country than in Canada? And of course, now I recognize that public policy is the field, along with economics, that seeks to explain all that. I graduated from college in 1988 with an urge to see the world and an urge to write, just like I described. One of the most important decisions I made is that after graduation, I decided to travel around the world with my then girlfriend, now wife. We worked long enough to make enough money to pay for the trip. And then we took off in October of 1988 and traveled for 9 months. Of course, if you think about that period, 1988, 89, the Berlin Wall's coming down. We were actually in China right before Tiananmen Square. So it only fed my urge to kind of understand the world and to write about it. And from there, most of what I've done makes sense. I mean, it's all kind of been in the service of writing, public policy, and a little bit of politics thrown in along the way.
What makes you different in a way that most Americans don't even have a passport? And so there you are, you want to travel the world, you want to travel every state in the United States, and you want to travel with your family, and yet many Americans don't get out of their little town and they don't know what else is out there. So where does it come, the disconnect?
It's a good question. And it's certainly unfortunate that more people aren't more curious about the world, because I think it becomes a less scary, more understandable place when you actually get out there. I would give some credit to an extraordinary teacher I had in middle school. And she decided it would be a good idea to take our middle school class. So we were only in 7th or 8th grades. That's 12 or 13 years old. I mean, what a terrible age to travel with. But she thought it'd be great if she took the class to Mexico, which she did. So we went to Cuernavaca, Mexico. We stayed with families. It was back in the day when they kind of just turned us loose, even though we weren't very old. And I remember it being a life-transforming experience. It was radically different than the place where I had grown up. I thought it was interesting. It was fun. The food was way different than the Mexican that I'd had at home. Everything about it made me want to do it again. I chose Dartmouth as a college. So I teach here now, but I also went here as an undergrad, in part because they had an incredible number of foreign study programs, and I took advantage of them. While I was a college student, I did the usual ones. I went to England and I went to France, but I also worked in Kuwait. And of course, Kuwait was such an extraordinary place that fed my curiosity to travel even more extraordinary places, and that led to the trip around the world. So I think it was kind of an incremental process, and every time I traveled someplace, I just found it interesting and different. And at some point, it becomes kind of a habit of mind that you just really enjoy exploring different cultures.
Is there any way to make the rest of America more curious about the rest of the world other than Netflix?
I actually have a lesser goal. I'd like to have Americans travel around America first. It's
Okay.
just, I mean, even this country is so diverse and we don't really understand each other. And so my short-term goal is to get them traveling places where they don't need a passport. And then maybe we'll expand to the continent. We'll get them to go to Mexico and to Canada. And then we can branch out from there. But people just kind of bunker down. And I don't have any magic recipe for overcoming that. It would be great if we could.
Right. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your career as a teacher at Dartmouth College. I see that you have been nominated many times as Best Teacher of the Year, or I don't know what sector, but that's very flattering. What makes you connect so well with the students?
When I went back to teach, first at the University of Chicago and then at Dartmouth, I drew heavily on my own experience as a student. I did this little mental calculation. So when I was a university student, I had to take, I believe, 35 classes to graduate because we were on a quarter system. And as I reflected on those classes, about 10 or 11 of them, including the foreign study classes, were just life-changing. I remember discussions that we had. I remember projects that I did. I remember coming out of the class with a different sense of the world. And then there were another 11 or 12 classes, so roughly another third, where they're fine, some foreign language classes. I learned some things, but they didn't really change me fundamentally as a person. And then the last third, I couldn't even remember what I took. So I got to a point where I couldn't even tell you what class number 25, 26, 27 was. And I thought to myself, all right, if I'm going to teach, I want to teach one of those classes in that first 12 or 13. I want people, I want to really challenge their beliefs. I want them to read great things. I want them to have discussions that they're not going to forget. And that's one of the reasons that I teach classes that travel. So you alluded to it briefly earlier. I teach classes where we'll study a place. Right now, COVID has interrupted it, but normally I'm teaching a class about South Africa. So obviously apartheid, actually the history before apartheid, the political transformation, the economic transformation that's still incomplete and so on. But then at the end of the course, the real payoff is that we would all travel there as a class and we would meet people who could talk about their experiences under apartheid, fighting apartheid, white, black, talking about the political challenges that remain. And there's something about being in a place like that. And of course, this comes right back to the travel that reinforces everything that we've learned in a book in a way that just sticks with you. And so I just wanted to teach classes that would stick with people. And that really is not giving conventional tests and papers. It's just got to be a deeper experience than that. So I have thought a lot about what makes a class that has lasting impact.
And when you go to South Africa, for example, you stay there for how long?
Usually it's about 2 weeks.
Nice, very nice.
And in the past, I did this at the University of Chicago, and we've visited some extraordinary places. I've taken students to Madagascar, Rwanda, Liberia, the Middle East twice. So and when we went to the Middle East, we'd go to Israel, we'd go to Jordan, we'd go to Ramallah. We've been to India a couple times, which is just a fascinating place from a public policy standpoint. So we've gotten to a lot of places, Brazil, where there are tricky policy problems. And every one of those, by the way, also shines a light back on the United States. So for example, when you start talking about South Africa's racial reconciliation, of course, it doesn't take long before you start reflecting on your own racial reconciliation. So it is odd that sometimes you can learn a lot about your country by going away and looking at it from afar.
Okay, and before this adventure that you had with your family, you had a previous adventure with your either wife or girlfriend, where you rented a trailer and you traveled to 48 states. Could you tell us about that adventure?
Oh no! So that must be somebody else. So that.
Oh come on! I thought I saw that on you.
I think one of the book reviews compared my book to somebody who'd taken a trailer.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, no, believe me, I would do that. I would love to do that.
Okay, well,
because for all the traveling around the world, I've probably not traveled as much in this country as I would like. but no, I've never been in a trailer that long.
Okay, great. Yes, and I was reading other book reviews, so
Yeah.
to see what other people were saying about you. So my mistake. Okay, then tell us what inspired this trip. Tell us what it was, who, your family members, how long, and where do you go?
The short answer is 9 months, 6 continents, three teenagers. I mean, that's really that's the bumper sticker version, and that of course begs the question like, why? Why would anybody do this?
And what age? Can you tell us what age were are your kids?
At the time we were traveling, the oldest, our daughter Katrina, was 18. The middle daughter, Sophia, was 16, and CJ, who's a boy, was 13. So they're all square. Now, from a practical standpoint, Katrina had graduated from high school, which meant that she could just take a gap year before college. That was quite easy. CJ was in 8th grade, which in the United States is not a major deal. You haven't started high school yet. We had to homeschool him, but that's not a big year to miss, either socially or academically. But Sophie was right in the middle. She was missing her junior year of high school, which is a fairly big deal, both academically and socially. So she was not that keen on the trip. We actually had to negotiate with her. She stayed home for 2 months, finished her volleyball season because she was a varsity athlete, and then met us in Lima, Peru. And then we were all together. But the idea was it would be a unique opportunity for them to learn. It would be a unique amount of family time that we would never have again. I mean, once Katrina went off to college and then Sophie went off to college, we're not getting 9 months with them again. It would be fun for my wife, Leah, and me. It would be not retirement, but it would be kind of a break from our careers. We both love what we do, but we worked very hard. And so it'd be a time to just kind of read and think and listen to podcasts and recharge a bit. So physically it would be exhausting, but mentally it was quite liberating. So for all those reasons, also we knew that we traveled well as a family. The kids had been going with me, as had Leah, on these trips that I organized with my students that we've been talking about since they were really, really young. CJ went to Brazil when he was 3. Sophie and Katrina went to India when they were, I think, 6 and 4 or something like that. They had traveled from a young age for so long that when I finally took Katrina to Washington, D.C., when she was in middle school, we were staying at a Hyatt or something like that. And she came running out of the bathroom and she said, "Can I drink the water here?" Because all of her travel experiences to that had been places where she associated being in a hotel with not being able to drink the water. So we knew we could pull it off. My kids really like being in interesting places. We travel in the same style. So we have the same expectations about how we spend our time. So we figured this was the only window where it was going to work. Let's do it.
Wow. Okay. And can you summarize then? You say 6 continents, but be more precise. Some of the countries and some of the experience that you live.
Yeah. So I'm counting North America. That gets me one of 6. Antarctica is the one we didn't make. We decided that we would leave in the fall, in part because I'm on an academic calendar. So we had from September to June free. The nice place to go in September is South America, because then we'd be traveling into spring, and it was lovely. So we flew into Cartagena, Colombia.
I'm from Colombia.
Okay, so where are you in Colombia? Are you from?
Just 2 hours north of Cartagena. It's called Barranquilla.
Oh, okay. We did not go that direction. We went the other direction. But, we landed in Cartagena and we had like 4 months. So we spent a decent amount of time, not in Colombia, but to get to the south of South America. We kind of make our way. We didn't quite make it to Ushuaia, Argentina, which, they bill themselves as the end of the world. But we were really close. We were within 100 miles of the tip of South America. And we just kind of made our way south. So in Colombia, we went to Medellin and Bogota and Salento. And by the way, we just loved Colombia. We were there at a very interesting time. It was September of 2016. So the peace referendum was October of 2016. So this is, of course, what everybody was talking about. And then we continued on and kind of made our way south. Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, went back to the Galapagos and met my brother for Thanksgiving, and then crossed the Pacific to New Zealand and Australia. where we drove around mostly. In South America, it was mostly buses. Then we went north into, so by the time it was, well, it would have been winter in North America, we were in South Asia. So Hong Kong, which is kind of interesting to have been in Hong Kong before the crackdown, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, another place that's changed quite radically just in the couple of years that we've been there, India, and then we crossed to Africa and spent some time in Tanzania and South Africa, and then went back to India for some kind of complicated reasons, then finished up in Europe in the spring, which is again another lovely time, you know, to be landing in Europe in late April. The last country we visited was the Republic of Georgia, which is just a charming and interesting place. And then we flew home, which
Wow.
would be June of 2017.
And what's the dynamic of your family during all this traveling? Was it all peaceful and getting along with each other, or were there some moment of rebellion among your kids?
There was all of the above. We had 5 complete family meltdowns, which we described as 3 people crying at once or 1 adult and 1 child crying at the same time. They were mostly at the beginning of the trip. We actually got better at the dynamics. The biggest challenge at the beginning was the introvert extrovert dynamic. That there are 2 of us in the family. I'm one of them who are quite introverted, where we just like quiet and reading and writing in our journals, and there needs to be some time for decompressing. We have 2 family members who are extroverted, Sophia and CJ. And CJ is really extroverted. I mean, he just processes the world out loud. And then my wife's kind of right in the middle. So she finds herself as a mediator. So early on, particularly in close quarters, as I think a lot of people are realizing with COVID, we had to manage the introvert extrovert thing. And we did. We figured, you know, Katrina and I just realized that sometimes we had to go away. We'd have to go to a cafe. We'd have to go write in our journal. It was, you know, part of our responsibility to just separate from the group and recharge. And we told CJ to talk less. That didn't work. But, you know, we got better at managing those dynamics. But, you know, on other things, like we really never had disagreements over how to spend our days. We had shared interests in the kinds of things we want to do, in part because we just love to eat. I mean, and I will tell you, one of my favorite nights of the whole trip was in Cartagena. And it was just a night of street food. It was just 2 hours on this beautiful night of just being in a plaza, just going from cart to cart to cart, cold beer, cart to cart to cart. And most of the world has just great street food. It's not expensive. So we like to eat, we like to walk, we like to wander. So that part was pretty easy. My wife kept the budget and she was really good at it. So and our budget was quite low, but there was Airbnb makes everything quite easy, much easier than it would have been, 10 years ago. And particularly in South America, it's easy to rent apartments, which means that you're in residential areas, which is, to me, is much more fun than being in a hotel or being in like a tourist area. So for the most part, once we figured out the introvert extrovert thing, we were pretty good to go.
And would you say that this increased the family cohesiveness? Are you guys now a stronger, more unified family after this, or after that, goodbye that? I'll call you again next year.
Both. I think in the near term, it's goodbye dad. I mean, Katrina could not wait to get to college, and Sophia went off to college, and they've got to spread their wings and be independent. On the other hand, it does mean that we have this very, very intense shared family experience that will be with us forever. And we have in our kitchen a photo frame, a digital photo frame with the photos from the trip. And oftentimes we will just sit in the kitchen and just watch the photos and talk about the ones that come up and see who can spot and identify where the photo was taken. But it has this transfixing effect. And the same is true just telling stories from different places. And of course, now the book is an additional shared experience. So I think longer term, it definitely pulls everyone together. Short term, they're teenagers and it's time for them to get out in their own life and they're going to spread their wings.
Okay, of course, spending 9 months overseas is a huge endeavor, but what would you say to families who want to have an activity together, something that pulls them a shared experience, but they don't have the time nor the budget to go overseas? You have some other alternative you could suggest?
I think it can be shrunk accordingly. It could be 3 weeks. It could be 2 weeks. I think what makes a difference is just doing it together. So, get off the electronics and just do something that you really are sharing, whether it's camping or traveling domestically. I mean, there are plenty of national parks that would provide a very similar kind of experience, or plenty of cities. I mean, Montreal would be one, Quebec City is another, where you could go and just wander the city and have a great adventure. I think what makes it important is that first you've kind of checked out from your life, and you have to decide how long that is. I mean, for me, it's got to be longer than a couple of weeks. It's got to be long enough that you're telling people, hey, I'm leaving, deal with the problem, or contact somebody else. So you really have disconnected. I think that's part of the mental angle of what's going on. It's got to be together. It can't be 5 people just going to the same place and then doing their own thing. And I would say it has to have some unplanned aspect to it. I mean, part of 9 months means it has to be unplanned. You can't have an itinerary for 9 months. It'll drive you crazy. Or certainly you can't when you leave. And so having some ability to adapt, which I think is part of what draws you together as a group, you're making some decisions. And like I said, that could be a really short adventure or it could be longer. But I think there's, as you said at the outset, plenty of room for people to be more creative and more ambitious in what they do in terms of traveling. And it could be cities, it could be outdoor areas, but the world is an interesting place.
Right. Do you think your kids have grown to have more empathy towards people from other races and origins now that they have gone and visited and seen the whole world as opposed to staying in your city, wherever you live?
I hope so. I'd like to think that's true. I mean, it takes a little time. There's a lot of growing up that has to be done. They're still not that old, but I believe that to be true. We live in a place now in New Hampshire that's not particularly diverse. Our town's actually not even very socioeconomically diverse. It's not racially and ethnically diverse, with the exception of the college. When we lived in Chicago, it was quite different. We lived in the city of Chicago, and Chicago was much more diverse, although still quite segregated by neighborhood. And I do think when you get out in the world and you read about conflict somewhere, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's an ethnic conflict, whether it's what's happening in Hong Kong and China, where you've got, a government situation where there's, the government is cracking down, Myanmar, where you have a coup. I think that my children now can, first of all, they can put it in context. They know what part of the world it is. They know what Myanmar is like. They know what the difference is between a poor and a middle income country. They know that the challenges that people face on an everyday. So I would hope that as you start to read the newspaper, all of this is just in better context. And the empathy thing, that's also just a personal virtue. You got to kind of work on it, and you got to be a reader and so on. But I would like to believe that my children will have a greater respect for and understanding of the rest of the world. That was certainly part of the mission of this adventure.
When you tell people that you travel here and there, I guess many people will say, oh, that's too expensive. Well, of course, they have their SUV parked outside their garages. What can you share in regards to the expenses? How expensive or how inexpensive it could be just to travel, I don't know, Canada, Mexico, or South America?
Yeah, well, the short answer is it's cheaper than staying at home. And I mean that for real. Like, you have to do some things. So, for example, we rented out our house, which is really important. I mean, a house is probably the most important asset that most people have. Or if you have an apartment, you stop paying rent. Either way, like, that's a major source of money that you're not spending or income that you're getting. So our housing budget, we just took the rent that we got for our house, divided by 30, because the rent was monthly, and that was how much we spent on housing. So that was a complete wash. So effectively, like, housing's free. And then you get to food, and food is way cheaper everywhere else than it is here. Wow. We were talking about street food. So we're actually spending less on food. So that's like a savings. We're not spending on vacations. We're not spending on recreation and golf and theater ticket. Like, all that spending goes away. We didn't have to insure our cars, so all the insurance payment goes away. So basically, most of our life expenses stopped. And everything that we were traveling, all our expenses were less, including plane tickets, bus tickets, when you fold all that in, than what we were spending at home. Now, The big expense, the elephant in the room, is that we weren't earning money, right? So it's the best way to think of how expensive this is not what you have to pay to travel. That's what everyone focuses on. It's what you give up by leaving, and that's your income. So it's 9 months of income, which is not a trivial sum. But here's the thing. You have to pay taxes on 40% of it, and you don't have to pay taxes on money that you don't earn. So really, it's like 60% of 9 months of income, which is still a lot of money. On the other hand, if I said, in order to do something like this, you have to work for another 9 months before you retire. So you're going to retire at 67 and 60 instead of 66. No one's going to say, wow, that's not a huge sacrifice. Or if you have one member of a couple working and the other one decides not to work, if that one person works for a year, like that would pay for it. I mean, there are a lot of mental gymnastics you can do. And it's a thing that lots of people can't do. I appreciate that. And we're enormously privileged, but really we're privileged because we could leave our jobs and come back. It's not that we're rich. It's that we have the flexibility in our jobs. So I want people to, yes, we're lucky, but I want people to understand why we're lucky. It's not because we won the lottery or had millions of dollars. It's because we had jobs. I mean, I'm a professor. My wife now she's a principal. I mean, we're not hedge fund managers. But I think the key is lots of people can't do it. I understand that, but lots of people can, and they don't. And part of this book is directed to them. And maybe they don't want to do 9 months, but they could do 3 weeks. They could do a month. I think there's a lot more room for people to be creative than they are. And I think a lot of times people rationalize not doing it by saying it would be really expensive. And I really want to disabuse that idea. It's not that expensive.
Wow. Okay. I'm just going to share with you an experience real fast, and then we close it off. There is a Grand Prix of Montreal here every year, except now. And at that time, the prices of hotels and property goes up enormously, 3 or 4 times. So what I have done 2 times is that I rent my apartment in Airbnb at a super high cost, and I go and spend a week in Cuba, all inclusive food and drink, and I break even.
Yes. So we do something like that every once in a while here, because when graduation comes along for the college, all the families and parents come to this small town. And so we could rent out our house just for the graduation weekend and fund a really nice vacation. So yes, I think there's a lot of room for people to be more creative about that.
Okay, Charles, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Can you please tell us one more time the name of your book and where people can follow you?
The book is called We Came, We Saw, We Left, A Family Gap Year. You can buy that book just about anywhere, and you can follow me at charleswheelan.com.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Oh, it was a pleasure.